Great to be here. It's especially good to be here because yesterday I was actually in Florida. So I was very pleased last night to arrive. It was a little bumpy, but not too bad. So as Rob mentioned, I'm with Red Hat, and I'm actually on the products and technology side, and my specific role is looking at our entire portfolio and thinking about the strategy and the go-to-market and how our products together can solve actual customer problems. So that might sound very obvious to you, but because everything we do is the open source development model, it comes from many different communities and projects, and so how we think about those things working together to help the customer and also working with the many, many partners in our ecosystem, including NGINX and many others. And in that role, I have the privilege of meeting with customers literally all over the world. And in doing so, one of the things I've realized is that regardless of size of organization, whether it's public sector or other industries, we're all facing some very similar challenges and priorities, and I think Gus spoke to some of those yesterday from what I heard of his keynote. And so what I thought I would share is just some of those learnings that I'm seeing and some consistencies that I'm seeing and some of the things that I'm having conversations with our customers, and thought maybe that would give some new perspective or give you some food for thought. And happy to talk more about it at lunch. And I will not be talking about our products at all. I know you're very disappointed about that because you love product pitches. So just go on our website and you can learn all about our products. So one of the things I hear from a huge group of organizations is they have a cloud-first strategy. And whether that means the same thing to everyone, I don't think it does, I don't know. But one thing that I have seen is that it's often just a declaration as a strategy, usually top-down, and people don't always know exactly what that means or how they're supposed to execute against that. But it's the number one thing I hear when I meet with organizations, especially if I'm meeting with a CIO, when I say, what is kind of your strategic vision? Oh, we have a cloud-first strategy. How many of you have a cloud? I can't see you, so it wouldn't matter if you raised your hand. Faster innovation. We have to keep moving faster, right? This is not new. We've been told this forever. But it seems like the pace at which we need to move and innovate and deliver new applications and new services is just faster than ever before. And of course, that is only aligned with cost reduction. So I don't know any organization that is able to innovate and just, here, I'll just give you a free check, just go do whatever you need to do, buy whatever technologies you need to buy. I was with one bank in the Netherlands, and the CIO needed to cut 70 million euros from his budget. And we were in there talking to him about containers and microservices and all these great new technologies that he could use to build new applications and become a digital bank. And his answer was, great, help me cut 70 million euros, and I can talk about all kinds of stuff. And so we can't just do one or the other, right? We're constantly having to move fast, do new things, deliver new services, but we're still under the same pressure of do it all for less. And all of this is because we are being told we need to go through a digital transformation, be a digital leader. And whether you are just starting that and starting to emerge and adopt new technologies, or you think that you're leading in some areas. And by the way, this isn't linear, and it's not necessarily just one maturity or capabilities track. You're doing this in many different parts of your organization. So you might have one area where you are a leader and others where you're literally just trying to figure out what to do, and that's okay. But the biggest thing that I've seen that digital leaders do, or people that are attempting to become leaders in their area and deliver new digital experiences and digital services, is they are willing to change, and change at a very fast pace. And as we all know, change is one of the scariest things that humans can do, right? We hear about that all the time. What are people most afraid of, other than spiders and falling, I think? It's change, right? So what do they change? That transformation is actually not just technology. And this is not that new, right? We always talk about people, process, technology. But I like to think about it in a little bit different way, and that we have to transform and really think about the next generation of architecture across our entire IT environment. Think about processes and how we can become more agile, and that's part of that speed, but also our adaptability, right? So change has got to be really adaptable. and constantly thinking about and iterating and reacting to what's happening in our market. And then instead of just people, how do we think about culture in a different way? Right? And how do we make it more of a collaborative culture? And we're going to talk about all of these. So the number one thing I see is that people that stand apart and are really getting it have a vision. And maybe that sounds simplistic, but very few organizations that I have a shared vision. I was with a bunch of ministry CIOs in Canada, and they not only didn't have a shared vision across IT for the entire province that I was in, they could barely talk to each other, right? So the ultimate silos. So my challenge to them was, why don't you guys figure out, is there anything that you can agree on as a shared vision of becoming a digital government, right? Because their boss, the minister, is saying he is going to deliver that. And if they can't figure out how to come together and have a shared, vision or definition of what that would be, they won't be successful. But it also can't be just a top-down mandate, right? You can't have, the CEO can't say, okay, our vision is this. It's got to have that bottoms-up acceptance and really, ideally, some of that vision coming from other parts of the organization. And then finally, it's got to be aligned to business outcomes. So it can't be so far-fetched and so out there that you can't actually measure it and know that you're getting there. And it's got to be aligned with what the business is trying to do. They're also high performers. There's a great report that Puppet Labs puts out with some researchers every year and looking at DevOps and high performers. And there's been some really strong metrics that come out of that report that shows how digital leaders and high performers are just doing things differently. And one of those is pure speed. And this has actually gone down a little bit. In the year before this, it was something like 200 times more. And so it's kind of been moderated, but it's been moderated because they realize we still need to go faster, but we need to do it with stability. But if you think about it still, deploying code 46 times more frequently. If you think about that release cadence and what that's doing in your environment and how often you are updating and innovating. Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands is a great example of this. So first, they had a really clear vision. We are going to become the best digital airport. And they had a whole bunch of things, what that meant for all different parts of the airport. But I don't know if you've been to that airport. It's actually one of my favorite airports, which may be strange, but when you travel a lot, you do have your favorite airports. And they not only have a great experience just from food and shopping and how easy it is and the signage, but they have an app where you can literally go on and find new services and find out what's going on with all the different airplanes and the different parts of the airport. So they're trying to create this very interactive experience for people that are in this airport. The other thing they did is they are adopting new technologies at a very fast rate and really embracing DevOps and other processes. And you can see they launched a new cloud platform in 10 days. And this is a huge organization. And they cut development time for new services and APIs by 50%. So very measurable results as they're going through and trying to become the best digital airport. So it's not just a fluffy vision. There's very specific things that they're doing and measuring. And so as Schiphol shows, digital leaders are really embracing agile. Agile not just as a development methodology and kind of our lean principles that go along with that, but agile in terms of how fast they are adapting and how they are bringing different parts of the organization together. Not surprisingly, digital leaders use data. And it's not just about, we have all this data. It's how are they constantly using that to make better decisions and helping inform the business, helping inform IT leaders, helping inform developers, helping inform everyone to figure out what really is going to make a difference, or how do I predict what's going to happen next, right? So literally, taking all these different sources and using it to make better decisions. So this is a great example of an organization of scientists. So they have a massive cloud platform that all these different researchers can use. And what they had before was all the different data was stored in all different types of storage, all different databases. It was all over the place. So they weren't sharing information. And they had researchers that were out in the field, dealing with literally, life or death. And so now that they've created this new cloud platform and they've consolidated, they have this, amazing distributed storage system that handles, petabytes of data every day. But more importantly, it's how it's being aggregated and used. So they can actually predict what is going to happen with this disease? Can we save more lives? And it literally is making a huge difference in how they're able to analyze that. If you look at every kind of disruptor in any market, behind them will be open source technologies. Obviously, NGINX is open source. At Red Hat, we do everything in the open source development model. But take us aside. There is no way that you can innovate fast enough on your own. And why would you, right? When you can leverage thousands of developers all working together to figure out how to solve a problem in a new way. So for us to truly move at the pace we need to move and to innovate, we've got to leverage open source and the communities around that. And that can mean different things for different people, right? But it's where the innovation engine is. A good example, so this is government of British Columbia. One of the things they did is built a cloud platform for developers, both in agencies as well as citizen developers. And you're starting to see this a lot. A ton of public sector organizations and governments are finding they've got to provide that platform so that they can help drive innovation either in private industry or the public sector, but they've got to somehow, give that foundation so people it's easier for people to do that. And they're leveraging open source, they're driving DevOps, they're doing huge amounts of developer hackathons and all this kind of stuff to really push innovation. And it's all based on open source. This is probably the hardest piece. And the thing that you're seeing, and I can't tell you how many conversations I'm now having around culture, which is very different. Like, we can talk in the weeds about technology all day long, right? But when we start talking about how we work together and our organizational culture, especially IT culture, that's a very different conversation. And yet, to truly become a digital leader, to truly transcend, what's happening in your industry and disrupt your industry, you've got to work together in different ways. So breaking down the silos, all those things we talk about. But it's also about, accountability and looking at accountability in different ways. And I love this quote from Kodak. We all know, it's almost like the ultimate digital disruption example, right? But I love this quote. Wise business people concluded it was best not to hurry to go from 70 cents on the dollar for print to maybe 5 cents for digital. And we all have our version of this. What is your version of digital versus print? Because these were not stupid people, right? They built this massive organization that was successful for many, many decades. And you can just see them all sitting around the table, right? And God save the guy that raised his hand and said, I really think we should go for that 5 cents, right? And we all know what happened to them. And I think this is the point, is that if you've got too much structure and you're not willing to change the way you do things, you are not going to be able to move fast enough. It's just going to take you too long to make that change. Okay, I don't know why we went back to that. So part of the thing when we talk about open source is open source culture. And the whole premise of open source culture is collaboration. The best ideas win. We like to call it meritocracy sometimes. Transparency, the fact that everybody has the same information. So if you think about that in your organization, do only the top leaders know what's going on, or does everyone know what's going on? Does everyone have the same vision? Does everyone have access to the same information? Do you actually let the best ideas bubble up and win? Can anyone go to the CEO and say, that's a stupid idea? That's really, really hard, but that is what companies are doing. Even military organizations, the US Army, who we work with, is vastly changing in IT how they innovate and how they listen to people across the organization. And if you think about the most hierarchical organization in the world would be military. But they're realizing they too need to transform. And you've probably talked a lot about this over the last couple days, right? Digital leaders focus on the application and, importantly, focus on developers. We all went through this process a decade ago where we thought, oh, we'll just outsource development. Remember that trend? So 10, 20 years ago, we moved all of our development operations to Bangalore and to Russia and to wherever else, Brno, Czech Republic, because it was cheaper. And now all of a sudden, development and our applications are the most important thing that we can do, right? That's our IP, that's our competitive edge. And now we're competing to recruit and keep developers with Google, right? And with digital native organizations and with really sexy startups. So what do we do in our organizations to keep and maintain and incentivize and excite developers and give them a voice? It's key to our digital transformation. And of course, digital leaders actually disrupt. And the thing about disruption that is so hard is it means you're taking a risk, and at that moment you take that risk, you look stupid, right? Everyone else in the company, as well as your entire industry, are like, man, that is so dumb, right? And you're literally swimming upstream. Just imagine, though, if Kodak had said, yeah, we're going to go all in on that 5 cents, man. We're going all in on digital. Their board, the stockholders, everybody would have been said, are you crazy? Your revenue is going to drop off a cliff. But where would they be today if they'd actually had the courage to say, nope, we've got to pivot, and we've got to pivot hard? Very few leaders and organizations have the courage to do that. I think what's interesting is we always talk about disruption as if it's bad, right? It's putting someone out of business, or it's some technological innovation that's causing us great pain. But it actually can be really for good, and I love this example. This is the government of Singapore. And they realized they had to do something to really create more innovation across the country. Because remember, very small city-state country, everything they do can impact the success, not just of an organization, but of the entire country. So they built a cloud platform. They did all these things to help companies and individuals that wanted to innovate. And they held these multiple hackathons. And they asked the citizens, what are problems that you're seeing that we need to solve? And one of the challenges that came up was from a group of doctors that said, people are dying before we can get them to the hospital because we can't get the ambulances to the areas where they need to be to help these people survive that have had a heart attack or other things, because it's a really crowded, small area. So they held this, hackathon, and they started building this app, and it ended up being a mobile app. And there were kind of pieces of it that sat in different places, one in the hospitals, one that everyone could have on their phone, and then one for emergency responders. And this could be anybody trained. So it could be a paramedic, a doctor, a nurse, or just, if you know CPR, you know how to use a defibrillator, and you could register on the app. And the point was that if someone saw something, they could hit the location on the app. If you were an emergency responder, you would get this alert. And if you were anywhere near there, you could run and try to help, and you would immediately know also where the equipment was. They put defibrillators all over the city. So the first time this was used, one of the big parks in Singapore, a jogger was going down the path, had a heart attack. Someone saw it, hit the app. A doctor happened to have been at the tennis courts along the way. I don't know if you've been to Singapore, but their parks are like huge. They're like, there's tennis courts here and basketball courts everywhere. Doctor runs over from the tennis courts, grabs the defibrillator on the way, saves the man's life. The ambulance finally got there, got to the hospital, and he lived. They figured out in the first few months that this app was launched, they saved 70 lives. And it was so awesome. The government spokesperson for this came to our big user conference, and he got on stage and told the story. And as he was telling the story, he literally started crying. It's like, suited Singaporean government official. There was, everyone in the audience was crying. And it was just a simple thing. How do we do something differently using technology to save lives? So what is keeping us? Besides we don't want to take a risk, besides it's scary, besides we have to reduce costs, we have to do all these different things like we always have. 70% of what we're doing is still the same old stuff, right? This is that 70-30. I think it got better. It used to be 80-20. But literally we have to flip a bit here, right? We've got to put 70% of our time, money, effort, everything into innovation and get that keeping the wheels on the bus down to 20%. So the reality is we've got to do both at the same time. So going back to that Netherlands bank example, we can't wait to figure out how to cut 70 million euros until we can innovate. We've got to figure out how to do both at the same time, which means everything that we're thinking about investing in and moving to from an innovation standpoint has to help us also reduce cost and become more efficient. So we've got to figure out how to optimize everything and innovate at the same time. Great quote. I don't know if anyone's read this book, Accelerate. I think you know Gene Kim. These are actually, I mentioned that the researchers that work with Puppet Labs on the DevOps report. It's written by Nicole Ferguson and Jez Humble, who actually work on that report. So this is taking their insights from 4 years of doing this research. And the thing that they kind of came away with, in addition to, you've got to move fast, thus the name of the book, Accelerate, is that notion we had for so long of bimodal, meaning, oh, we'll do this and we'll optimize and then we'll innovate, and it's like these two separate worlds. They found out you've got to do it all at the same time, and that speed only works if you can also have stability. Right? So we've got to quit thinking, oh, I'm so focused on security, I can't have any data breach, and so that's keeping me from innovating. Right? It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And one of the things in conversations, I talk a lot with architects and people that are trying to look holistically across their entire IT environment. And I had this like aha moment, and I've started talking about this with a lot of our customers, and that is, we had this practice where we allowed kind of each functional line of business or area to kind of make their own decisions about technologies based on what they had to do. And it was absolutely for the right reasons and good intentions and all that at the time. But what happened is we now have an IT environment where we've got 15 different operating systems, 5 different hypervisors, 1 million different load balancers, different kinds of storage all over the place. And it probably is fine for that application or that line of business. The problem is that because of those decisions, we actually have absolute chaos if we were to look holistically across our IT environment. And so it sounds a little bit going against what we think is right, but if we actually start thinking about making bets on some standardized layers or fabrics of our architecture, that's going to allow us to scale and reduce cost, by the way, because we're not going to have 7 different vendor relationships doing the same thing. So how do you think about that and cross your own environment or ecosystem? And what's interesting is I was listening to the demos earlier with the load balancer. I could probably put load balancing on here, right? Because how can you think about, do we want a common way to do that? And it reminded me of when I was doing this huge PCI compliance thing a few years back, and we thought the easiest way to really improve our DR was to duplicate part of our architecture into the public cloud, and this was early, this was probably 10 years ago. And one of the problems we had is we could not literally do the same load balancing architecture in the public cloud at that time as we had in our data center. So we didn't do it. We built a second data center, which the cost, if I think about that today, it just seems ridiculous. So the more that you can do these things consistently across all of those IT environments, from your data center, whether it be bare metal or virtualized infrastructure, to private cloud, to public cloud, to multiple public clouds, think of how you can move faster if you're automating things in the same way, right? All of those things play onto each other. And this was one company, a financial services company, very large bank, how they thought about this. So they literally looked across every single part of their IT environment. This is obviously an overly simplified view of this. But they started to look at every single section and think, okay, what do we do here? How do we innovate? How do we consolidate, standardize, cut costs, all those things? And they looked at their data center environment, and they said, are we really being as smart as we could, even in our physical infrastructure? And they realized that there were different ways to look at this. And one of the things they did was standardize on a single operating system. They also standardized on a single virtualized infrastructure, which in this case I think was VMware. And they also found that there were things that they could do to make that more strategic. And they actually saw there's some workloads that really were ideal to put on virtualized infrastructure, and that was okay. And so they really thought about their physical infrastructure more strategically, as opposed to saying, oh, that's bullshit, it's physical infrastructure, we gotta get rid of it. They just looked at it in a different light. Then they started testing public cloud and private cloud. And they did a lot of different things, and they decided for certain applications that were mission critical, in this case it was a European bank, so highly regulatory environment, private cloud was where they were going to put their sensitive data and mission critical applications around that data. Public cloud was going to be where they needed to move fast and innovate and let their developers pound on it all day long. And they also had a goal technically, so they had a technical vision that aligned with trying to become a great digital bank or whatever their vision was, and that was everything was going to be in containers, and it was going to be a strategic hybrid cloud. So they would have the agility and the portability to move those containerized applications into whatever environment made sense based on the criteria and capabilities they required. So my question or challenge or advice would be, instead of us constantly talking about this cloud-first strategy, why not talk about an application-first strategy and think about what we are trying to do for our business, our organization, through technology, through those applications, which is how our customers and users touch us, and then figure out what's right from an infrastructure perspective, and aligning those workloads and those applications to the right infrastructure based on capabilities and really clear criteria. If you look at where workloads are today, I think we have the impression that there's a lot more in the public cloud than actually is. Public cloud is definitely growing. It is a critical part of our strategy. But the vast majority of applications are still on virtualized infrastructure today and will be for quite a few years, and that is still growing. There's a lot of hosted, managed services, so just because it's on premises doesn't mean that you have to manage it. And we're seeing a lot of growth in that area where, I want it on premises, but I need somebody else to take care of that. This is just a partial list of some of the areas that we've been talking about around application criteria or capabilities. And even within Red Hat, our internal IT, we're going through the same exercise right now and trying to think about what is the right way to think about this. And those of us that kind of started our careers in infrastructure, so I started in networking, network security, it's really easy for us to just want to start right in the infrastructure, right? But if we just pull our heads up and think, okay, what is actually touching our users, touching our customers, and then go down, we're going to make a lot better decisions. And the other thing is applications don't live alone. Every time we have that cloud-first strategy, it's if that application that we're putting in the public cloud is all by itself and there's no dependencies around it, right? Oh, I'm just going to put it up in the public cloud. But there's other applications, data sources, policies. I could go on and on, right? What are all those dependencies that are around that application? And what is the right decision based on those dependencies? Not only for that single application, but all the things that are around it and working with it. And there is no right or wrong answer, right? Everybody has to do what is right for them based on the capabilities that they have, the core competencies you have in your organization, what you're trying to achieve, that criteria list that you come up with as you do that application audit and assessment, right? So don't assume that just because one organization is doing something that's going to fit for you. And almost every organization I talk to and every research, this is one I believe from Forrester, but I can tell you this 60% number, it's funny, I looked at 4 different research analysis, and every one of them came around 60-61%, which I don't know why, but that tells you after a while, if numbers keep repeating themselves, that it must be close to the truth. So most organizations are not only hybrid today, but they're expecting to be hybrid, for the foreseeable future. So our vision at Red Hat, the way we think about this is what we call open hybrid cloud, which if I say that today, it sounds almost old-fashioned, but we started talking about this about 5 years ago. And that vision, I think, still rings true, in that it's about everything being open. So open source obviously is a given throughout, infused throughout the IT environment. Open APIs. Right? One of the things that we are religious about is that the APIs that we use across our own products internally are the same ones that we use with our partners, with our customers, right? And I remember, God, it seems like forever ago, where we used to talk about, if we could just have an open API infrastructure where everything, just works together. We do need to get there. That should be the right vision, right? But importantly, it has to be interoperable, it has to be secure, it has to be stable. So how do we combine this vision of open and interoperable with security, stability, reliability, because we're all running organizations and we can't have chaos. But we do need things to work together, especially if we are to continue to move forward on that digital transformation journey. So I want you to think about, like, where are you today? If you were to be honest, and like I said, it's not going to be all the same throughout your organization. I will tell you that most companies are still mostly in emerging. There's a few that are leading, at least in some parts of the organization. But I think this is honest. Most companies say they're engaged in some sort of digitization, whatever that means for them. And I realized I used to always show this as a linear journey, right? And at the end of the day, there's not a single destination. We need a vision. We need to constantly be thinking about what are we trying to achieve. But then we've got to start over again, because right about the time we get to that destination, chances are things are moving so quickly again, we've got to start over. So I'm thinking of it more in an agile process where it's just going to be iterating, right? So we're emerging, we're transforming, we're leading, awesome. Oh, now there's new technology, we're emerging again. So we're constantly trying to think of how can we do things differently. The thing I've learned, and I got this question by so many people that they would say, how would we actually know if we're being disrupted? Because I think we're good. I think our industry is totally fine. We are not getting disrupted. And if we look across all industries, I truly believe it's a matter of when, not if. And there are so many places that, you know, in hindsight, we look at that and go, oh yeah, we totally saw that coming. We did not see that coming. I was just in London. I was talking to a black cab, which hopefully if you go to London, you've all ridden in the black cabs in London. It's tradition. I was giving Rob shit earlier because he took an Uber. I told him he was the devil. You have to take a black cab when you're in London. It's just the rule. And they know, the thing about them, okay, I'm just going to digress for a minute, but they actually have to take tests on maps. I mean, it's a profession in the UK. Anyway, if you look at what's happening in that industry, I was talking to one cabbie that has been doing this, for 40 years, very proud of his career. He said, in 5 years, we'll be gone. Right? And he knows that. And there's a sadness with it, and yet he kind of has realized it's like, it is what it is. We didn't keep up. We finally have a mobile app, 3 years later. And so there's a lot of industries that, regardless of how great we felt about them or how well-defined they are or how professional everyone is, they are going out of business and being disrupted. This McKinsey research, I think, tells us well, is that you don't see it when it's starting, right? So you have your existing business model and you have a new business model and you're chugging along and you kind of see this, new business model happening over here and you're like, oh yeah, that's kind of disturbing, but we're good. Our revenues are still going up, our stock price, our EPS, everything looks good. We're just going up. And the problem is, if you don't actually address that disruption and make that courageous move and do something that is very disruptive to yourself, by the time you realize it's happening, it's too late. Because there's a pivot point, an inflection point where all of a sudden the new model takes off, and if the traditional model hasn't changed, it drops off. So the fact you don't see something now doesn't mean it's not there or that you're not going to be disrupted. So I'm going to close with 2 questions for you. If you were to all go back to your organizations later this week, hopefully, unless the hurricane hits Atlanta and we're all here together all weekend long, wouldn't that be fun? Wine's not bad, right? I mean, it was pretty good. I had a chocolate mousse last night that was pretty good. What would you do if you went back to your organization and you said, we are being disrupted, almost like a war room, right? Create your disruption war room. What would you do differently if literally you were at that moment around the table with Kodak executives and they were making the decision that day, 70 cents or 5 cents, print or digital? Figure out what your version is. Maybe even do it in a pilot. I mean, it doesn't matter, but how would you act differently? Because even if you did it within your one part of the organization, you will make changes. I have seen it happen. Or more importantly, if you go back and you say, we are going to disrupt. And that could mean disrupt your own organization. It could mean disrupt your own team. Or it could mean disrupt your entire industry. But what would you be doing differently if in your mind you said, we are going to disrupt, we are going to be a disruptor, and you did it consciously? I think great things would happen. And with that, I think Rob's coming back up. Thank you. Okay. I'm supposed to stand here.
You knew that one.
Oh, I'm on that X? There's X's here we're supposed to stand on.
Yes. It's the frame for TV. OK, first of all, in fairness,
Yes.
I took an Uber to save money so that I could innovate. All right? It was cheaper.
Ubers don't always save money, though, because it's only if you make sure that they are telling you the fare beforehand, right?
Well, yeah. It's
Is that a
way
corporate
different
policy?
in
I don't know. Where's Gus? I'll have to ask him.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I just have a few questions, if you don't mind. So you had your sort of three models, I think emerging, transforming, leading. Help me break it down. How many companies fall in those different buckets?
Well, the vast majority, and I think I touched on this a little bit, would still be in emerging. And again, it's not just the entire organization, but I would say, if I had to put numbers to it, I know it'd be at least 50, 60% emerging, 25, 30 transforming, and you're going to have your 5 or 10% in leading. And that probably stays true even within an organization. You've probably got 5 or 10% where you're doing something really cool and you're leading the way, and then the vast majority of your organization is kind of trying to get there. So I think you could look at that, from a macro environment and also as a micro organizational environment.
Okay. And I know you've been traveling around a lot. I know you talked to a lot of CIOs about this. Does it have to come from the CIO? Can you be a digital leader lower in the ranks?
Ideally, it would come from lower in the ranks. And I think that's that point I was talking about with culture, is that the problem is most organizations, even if you have this awesome idea and you're sitting in the middle ranks, does it ever actually happen? And that's why I think, the places I see it works is where they can create some kind of pilot to do something awesome, and then it kind of bubbles up to the top where you can show them the success and you can say, hey, look what we did, here's the metrics, you're using open source, maybe unsupported at first just because you can access it for free, and then you can take that to your CIO and say, oh, and by the way, we can actually use this in a supported way, and here's the metrics, and let's start to move this forward. But if it's just the CIO saying it, it won't go anywhere.
Yep. Okay. Last question. What's next? For you, for Red Hat?
What's next? I was going to say it's only noon, so it's probably too early to drink. But I think, just kidding.
Just kidding, it isn't too early?
I think the big thing.
Well, I got you to start.
I think the big thing, actually, you guys are talking about it. What I am seeing is that two things, and you guys will have to validate if you feel this way too, is that our customers and users in general want to consume everything as they go, usage-based pricing. I just want to pay for what I'm using at the time. So the whole way of thinking about how we deliver and sell and pay and all these things around technology is going to continue to move in that way. And what that's doing is, I think, also driving from just a technological platform. If I think about Red Hat, but really overall in the industry, is can we deliver things in a more modular, services-based way, right? Because we're not going to have here's this huge piece of software, that you consume, and here's how much you're going to pay me every month. It's no, I just want to use these bits of it, and I want to pay for those bits that I'm using for this amount of time, or this amount of use, or this amount of storage, or whatever it is. And so I think that's really the biggest thing that we're going to see over the next 5 years, is that just moving faster and faster and faster. And then I think just the whole, continued role of developers and applications and the speed of innovation around how we're delivering applications.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us in Atlanta. It was great to have you.
It's been fun.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret.
Thanks.
Yeah.
You want that?